Welcome to Ray's Rugby. The World Cup is upon us. It kicks off September 18th in England. Canada's tournament gets underway the very next day in Cardiff against Ireland, and we have a job to do today. Now, normally most coaches have a pretty good idea by now of who they're going to take. We haven't seen an official long list from Rugby Canada, but I think if we look back at the selections over the last couple of years, we can pretty well piece together one ourselves. So we're going to do that today. Now, by no means is this an official list. Of course, there's plenty of rugby to be played. If we just look at our schedule here, we've got the middle of March, a very interesting and important tour to Fiji to take part in the newly formed Pacific Rugby Challenge. Then we move on to the end of June. We've got the brief CRC. It's only a couple games over a period of about a week. After that, we've got the Pacific Nations Cup, which thankfully has been revamped this year. And then at the end of August, we've got our World Cup warm-ups, and then bang, we're into the tournament. So there is time. However, there's not a lot of time for guys outside the squad to make a real good shot. So normally we take a look at about 50 players or so. Today we're actually going to go a little further. We're going to look at 60 players who might be in the picture for Canada. Now, of course, not being on this list doesn't actually mean anything, but I would suggest that it would be very unlikely that someone who isn't among these 60 is going to be at the tournament this fall. So let's quickly look back at our World Cup 2011 squad just to get some context of how we're going to select this. Of course, there were 30 players back then. There are now 31. They've added one player to accommodate for the extra player on the bench. Back then it was, remember, 7 reserves, and now we've got 8, a full complement in the front row. So here we are. We had 5 props, 2 hookers, 4 second rows, 5 back row, 3 scrum halves, 2 fly halves, 4 centers, 3 wings, 2 fullbacks. Of course, some of those positions are a little bit loose considering players covered multiple positions, especially in the backs. And I think we'll see that again this time. Virtually the same composition, maybe slight change. They'll add another front rower, probably a hooker specialist. And I think they'll add maybe one more back rower, take out one back, just because all the backs who are going to go have the ability to cover 2 or 3 positions. That's pretty well across the board there. So let's not waste any more time. Straight into the front row, Hubert Bidens, of course, one of the beardos from the 2011 World Cup. Remember, he didn't actually break into the squad until that year, earlier that World Cup year, 2011. So there are chances for players to break in, maybe. But Hubert has been our loosehead ever since. He's playing very well. He's actually spent the last couple of seasons in New Zealand with Manawatu, and he's slimmed down quite a bit. He's lost a few kilos. It's certainly helped him in the mobility department, but I'm not sure it's helped him in the collisions. I watched him play with Castaway Wanderers. He was playing second row the other day against Seattle. I'm hoping that doesn't continue very long. Anyways, most likely he will be our loosehead prop come September. Jason Marshall, another fan favorite. He's been our tight head prop since the last World Cup. He's actually a converted quarterback from football, amazingly, so he's quite an impressive athlete for a prop. Really does stuff around the pitch that not very many other props can do. Now, of course, the caveat is his scrum isn't necessarily where maybe we had hoped by now. I think the new engage has maybe thrown him for a loop a bit like so many others. He certainly had some struggles there in November, and he actually went and spent a season with Hawke's Bay in New Zealand and played in the ITM Cup Div 2 final against Hubert Bidens. Didn't have the greatest afternoon if you go and find the clip. But he's now with Agen in France in Pro D2, so hopefully that helps with his scrum problems there. And I'm sure we'll see him in our number 3 jersey come the fall. Andrew Tiedemann, he's unquestionably our number 3 prop right now. He starts with Plymouth Albion in England. Prefers tight head. Of course, he's covered loose head quite a bit, and actually he's filled in at hooker on a couple occasions. I don't think that'll be we'll be seeing that too much in the future. But he's quite a good prop, and maybe he's putting a little pressure on Marshall with his work in the scrum. He'll certainly be in the squad in September. Jake Ilnicki is one of our star up-and-comers, the former captain of our under-20 side. He's a tight head prop. He went and spent a few weeks with the New South Wales Country Eagles down in Australia in the fall, but he's come back. He's now back with Castaway Wanderers in Victoria. Now, strangely, they've had him lined up at hooker for a couple times recently. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. I watched him play the other day. I would suggest he stays at tight head. That's where we need him most. I think that's where he'll be for the fall. I'm not sure if that's a BC rugby selection thing or if a Rugby Canada edict, but let's hope he's in the tight head spot. I think he'll be in the World Cup squad in the fall. Doug Wooldridge out of Ontario. He's actually now also with Castaway Wanderers. How many props do they need over there? So he's an underrated prop for me. He's done very well with the Ontario Blues in the CRC the past few seasons with that excellent front row. Very strong scrummager. Surprised he's never been a pro. Covers both sides, and I think he'll almost certainly be with the team in September. Big Tom Dolezal. I got a lot of time for this guy. For me, he was the form front rower in the CRC last year. He struggled a little bit with injuries beforehand, but he's back. Big, powerful, destructive scrummager at loose head. Carries hard in the loose. I'm sure he'll go on this tour to Fiji. I think right now he's probably our number 6 prop in the depth. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that's where he stands. So he's probably the odd one out. So depending on squad composition, he could miss out in September, but there's a long way to go yet. Justice Sears Duru. This is one of our great prospects. He's been on our national radar pretty much ever since he picked up a rugby ball. He's an incredible athlete for a front rower. Went and spent some time in the Leicester Tigers Academy over in the UK. Spent some time in New Zealand last year. Unfortunately, he broke his leg, but he should be just about ready to go now. So we'll see. Hopefully, he goes to this Fiji trip. I think the World Cup will come just a year, maybe too soon for him, but who knows? Primarily a loose head. He's played a little bit of hooker, also with Castaway Wanderers. So we'll see, but if not for this year, he's certainly one for the future. James Smith came over from Australia with Evan Olmsted to take part in the CRC with the Wolfpack, and really impressed. He's primarily a tight head, but he can cover all across the front row, scrummages well, he's quite mobile in the loose. Right now I think he's the odd man out. We'll see if he takes part in this Canada A trip. He is rather close, so if his professional obligations don't keep him from taking part, then I think we'll see him down there. Certainly a handy player, and you can never have too many options in the front row. Aaron Carpenter, of course, our former captain, switched from the back row into the front row, where he's now a permanent resident. Plays for Cornish Pirates in England, and he hasn't actually seen much playing time, if any, since the tour in November. I'm sure he'll be back to full fitness soon. For me, he's got to be our starting hooker at the World Cup. We need leadership on the pitch. His throwings actually look pretty decent. His scrummaging seems to be coming around. I think by then he'll be good to go, and he'll be our number 1. Ray Barkwell, kind of a latecomer to the senior squad, but he's really impressed and become a fan favorite over the last couple of years, not only with Ontario Blues, but with his performances at senior level. He's all action. He's all over the place. Sometimes he just gets a little too excited and he can take his eye off the ball or take kind of an overzealous penalty, but if he can control himself, he could be a real impact sub. That's where I think he'll be our reserve hooker come the World Cup. Of course, he faces competition from Ryan Hamilton. He went to the World Cup in 2011, and he suffered some injury problems in the last few years. On form, frankly, he could be our number 1 hooker. It's finding that form again, though, and consistency on the field that he's going to have to show us. Hopefully, he'll go to Fiji. We'll get a better look at him. He looked really rusty in the fall. Benoit Piffero, the Frenchman, spent some time with Burnaby in BC. He's now back in France playing with Blagnac. He's a solid, dependable type hooker. I don't think he's really in contention, probably in the non-traveling reserves. So as it stands, if the team were picked today, the front row would look something like this. Bidens, Wooldridge, Tiedemann, Ilnicki, Marshall at prop, Barkwell, Carpenter, Hamilton at hooker. Probably isn't going to change too much, but maybe Dolezal gets a look in. Second row, say no more, Jamie Cudmore. The guy is just a beast. It's unbelievable. He'll be 37 this year, and he's still rumbling around like a kid. Built like a truck. He's far and away our best second row, world-class player. We just hope he stays fit for the tournament. Tyler Hodgson is a veteran of the last World Cup. He's an intelligent second rower. He's not the tallest, maybe not the most dynamic, but he has called the lineouts. He's a smart guy. He's playing with Doncaster right now over in England along with John Phelan, and they're actually kind of competing for the same spot. So that's making it tricky, but you'd think with his experience, he'll be in the side, but I wouldn't quite call him a guarantee at this point. Breck Bukaboom, of course, he comes from great athletic stock out of Ontario. It's another second row. He's about the same size as Hodgson. Probably a little bit better athlete, a little bit more dynamic. He's quite a bit younger. He's got a good upside. He's also at Plymouth Albion along with Tiedemann. He struggled a little bit with injuries, but it looks like he's fit and firing again. I think he's probable for the World Cup this fall. Towering John Phelan, as mentioned, he's at Doncaster along with Hodson. They're basically competing for the same spot, and actually Phelan has overtaken Hodson in that Doncaster pecking order. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's so good in the lineout. He's pretty much guaranteed possession. He's probably not as fleet-footed across the ground, but he's far and away Canada's best lineout option. For that reason alone, I think he'll be in the side in September. Again, no, none of these guys, Hodson, Bukaboom, Phelan, have established themselves as our number one second row beside Cudmore. So there's every chance that one or even two could miss out. A lot depends on squad composition. Cameron Pearce, here's a guy who could really make things difficult for the selectors. He's a terrific prospect. He's just gotten over some injuries at last. He moved from the Claremont Academy over to Pau in France, and he struggled a bit to get into the senior side, but over the last few weeks, he's starting to crack in. He's getting some regular time. I watched him play against Dax a couple weeks ago, and he didn't look out of place at all. Scored his first ever Pro D2 try. He's probably our next best line-out option to fail on. For me, he should be part of the squad in September, but at the expense of who, I'm not quite sure. He certainly looks like he has a bright future. Excellent athlete for a guy of his size. Bruising Aaron Flagg went and spent some time in New Zealand, the land of his ancestors, last year. He's our most physical and abrasive lock next to Cudmore. Just a little bit short maybe for a second row, and I think his fitness and work rate needs to be upped a little bit. I think he's probably a long shot for the World Cup, but if he goes well in Fiji and has a good summer, well, you never know. Evan Olmsted, as mentioned earlier, came across from Australia to take part in the CRC. He's the former Canada under-20 player. He played flanker, I believe, there. Played second row for the Wolfpack. He's probably a little undersized for that position, but a good bench option. He's very mobile. He's good in the line-out. I think we'll see him with the Canada A side that goes to Fiji. I don't think he's a favorite to go to the World Cup this fall, but that versatility and his energy, he's all-action kind of player, he could make a late run at it. Callum Morrison, the captain of the BC Bears. For me, he was one of the outstanding forwards of the CRC last year, and I thought he got a pretty rough deal at the ARC. He barely saw any time at all. He's got the height we're looking for at second row, but isn't the biggest, not the heaviest player. But he is a fierce tackler, and he's completely committed. Covers both blind side and second row. So he's very much in that same bracket as Olmsted. If Crowley wants to bring kind of a swing player who covers second row and back row, but I would say based on being kind of stiff to that CRC that he's on the outside looking in at this point. So our second row, as it stands, Cudmore, Phelan, Bukaboom, Hodson. I think this is far less settled than the front row. Pearce has a real shot to get in there. Of course, it depends on where Crowley sees, in particular, Jeb Sinclair, who played lock at the last tournament. But based on recent selection, these are the four guys. Speaking of the big man himself, Jeb Sinclair, of course, one of the beardos from the last World Cup. He's been with London Irish ever since. He's one of our outstanding forwards now, whether he's playing second row or blindside flank. For me, I'd rather see him on the flank. We really miss his physicality when he's not in the lineup. I think he's a surefire starter at some position, whether it's in the second row or at number 6 come September. Nanyak Dali is a fan favorite. He's captained our 7 side. He's played a lot of 7s. I think that's maybe hurt his 15s game a little bit, and I think the same can be said for a lot of players. That said, he's still probably our best over-the-ball flanker, but he's also very good as an impact player coming off the bench. I think with his experience, his dynamism, his physicality, and also as a character within the squad, I think he's a good bet to make the final squad. Tyler Arderon, of course, the new captain Canada. He's really emerged as kind of a star the last couple of years. He maybe had a slow year in Canadian colors last year. Missed a few games with injuries, but he's really come back in full flight with Ospreys. He's getting some starts at number 8 with the first side. He's actually captained them, I think, a couple times now. It's hugely important to our line-out. As he matures, he's only going to get better. He could emerge as a real star after the tournament this fall. John Moonlight currently captaining the 7 side. Maybe slipped in his form last year a little bit. Primarily an open side flanker, can maybe play blind side as well. I'm not sure anybody ever wants to see him play number 8 again. Supremely fit, he's very fast. How much his 7s has affected his 15s again is up for debate. I think he's odds on to be in the squad, could be our starting 7. but that's far from a certainty. Kyle Gilmore out of Alberta, he's had a tremendous year last year, probably our form flanker. He's rewarded for outstanding CRC form, captaining the Wolf Pack. Got called up and captained the ARC side, and of course made the tour in the fall. He's not really a star, dynamic type flanker. He's just a gritty, hard-working guy. Good in the line-out, all over the pitch, superbly fit. I think if you were picking the team today, he'd have to be there. But there's a lot of competition in that back row, so a lot depends again on squad makeup. Richard Thorpe, he's kind of come out of nowhere. Did anybody actually know he was eligible for Canada? It seems a little weird that he's just decided to play as he's turned 30. He was never really in England contention, so there was nothing holding him back before. Could be a new addition to the 2015 version of the Beardos if that happens. He's a versatile player, covers all across the back row, probably most comfortable at number 8, but certainly another option at open side as well. He doesn't really do anything exceptionally well. He's just a very good all-around player. He tackles well, he runs well, he's a smart player. He's playing with London Welsh over in the Aviva Premiership right now. I think he's a certainty for the World Cup, either as a starter or as back row cover from the bench. Admir Savanovic, really dynamic running number 8 out of Burnaby. He's been cutting up the BC Premier League for the last couple seasons. He's got impressive speed and footwork for a big guy, counterattacks really well, pretty good hands. He's now actually with the 7 side, and I wonder if that suits him maybe a little bit better. He doesn't really get in and do the hard nitty-gritty stuff. He's not going to oust Ardron, and he's not really a versatile player, so I think maybe 7s is the best fit for him at the moment. Seb Pearson had a great season with the Ontario Blues last year, made the ARC squad, had a brief flirtation with a conversion to hooker that didn't really last. Really solid, kind of old school number 8. Spent some time at the Leicester Tigers Academy a few years back. Maybe he hasn't quite delivered on that promise, but he stepped up his game in recent months. He's now with James Bay out in BC. I'm certain he'll go on this trip to Fiji. As for the World Cup, I think he's on the outside looking in at the moment. Justin Blanchett, now there's a name you probably haven't heard of, unless you're really paying attention. He's French-Canadian, actually played for the national under-17 side several years ago. He and his brother Sam went and joined the Exeter Chiefs Academy over in the UK. Sam is actually now part of the England Sevens national squad, but Justin is still available to Canada. He's a big flanker. He's starting regularly for Bedford Blues now. That's James Pritchard's club. Plays both sides. He's a big physical guy. He's tall, handy in the lineout, really loves to tackle. Probably more a blind side than an open side. He hasn't featured in any senior Canadian selections up till now, but all it takes is a phone call. So we'll see if he factors in Kieran Crowley's plans at all. Of course, still on Canadian shores, Kyle Bailey is from PEI, now resides in Alberta. It's a shame we really only get to see him play a couple times a year. He's been with the ARC side the last couple years, covers second row and back row, probably best at number 6. An impressive athlete for a big guy. He's explosive, he's very good in the line-out, he's young, he's the type of guy who really should be looking at a pro career. I'm not sure if those are in his thoughts. He's been over in BC before. I think maybe he needs to go over and really giving it another crack and getting under the nose of those national selectors. Hopefully he goes to Fiji. I don't think he'll make the World Cup, but he's certainly one for the future. Zach Coughlin, the best player in a disappointing Rock side last year, but he's been with the ARC squad the last couple years. He's a really mobile and powerful number 8. He's got pretty good speed. He's not the tallest back row, though, so I don't think he'll ever really crack the senior side there. However, though Pearson's conversion didn't quite work, I think Coughlin has the kind of physique that would really excel in the front row as kind of a Bismarck Duplessis-style hooker. So, Zach, if you're listening, if you switch to hooker, I think we might be able to find a spot for you. Number 8, it looks a bit more congested. Matt Mullins, our next great back row talent coming through the pipeline. He was with our under-20 side this last year. Very highly rated number 8 out of Ontario. He's currently with our 7s program out west. He's got the size, speed, athleticism, everything you're looking for. I think this World Cup is a couple years too early for him, but if he lives up to his promise, he could be pushing Ardron to the side of the scrum come time for the next one. Now a couple guys who unfortunately it doesn't look like will get a shot this year. Chauncey O'Toole, one of the most exciting players in recent times in the Canadian jersey. He's kind of faded in and out of national contention for the past couple years. It looks like he is now a full-time firefighter. I don't think he's going to be challenging for a spot this year. And similarly, Adam Kleeberger, the king of the Beardos, the darling of the New Zealand press at the last World Cup. He's back playing for Castaway Wanderers again. I watched him play at number 8 the other day. His body has just been so beaten up, though, from just the way he plays the game over the last few years. So many injuries. He just doesn't look like he quite has that explosiveness anymore. And with the amount of competition already in the back row, I don't think, sadly, he will be part of our squad this year. So the back row as it stands, Sinclair, Gilmore, Moonlight, Dalla, Thorpe, Ardron. Of course, this can go a lot of different ways. Sinclair could be picked at lock. Crowley could decide he needs more size in the back row. He could leave a couple guys with the sevens program. But as of today, these are the front runners. Moving right along to the backs, our new favorite Scotsman, Gordon McCrory. He qualified on residency this year and was very quickly brought into the squad, and for good reason. I think technically he's our best scrum half. Distributes well, kicks for goal. He bosses his forwards. He understands his role. He was far and away the best player in the CRC for me. And that's not to count out the challenge of Phil Mack. Of course, one of Canada's favorite players. He's a world-class sevens player. I think his 15s game has suffered because of that. His tactical decision-making isn't as strong at times. Certainly his kicking isn't up to McCrory standards. That said, Phil brings things to the scrum half position that very few others do. He can make something out of nothing. He keeps defenders on their toes. And of course, he has an undeniable will to win that other players look up to. Now, unfortunately, Phil has just had major surgery on his knee, and there's maybe a little question of whether he's going to be fit in time to take part in the World Cup. We hope he recovers. You never bet against his desire to compete. So as long as he's fit and firing, for now, we'll assume he's in the squad. But for me, he's a dynamic bench replacement with McCrory starting at 9. Sean White has been around the squad for a while. Kind of one of those guys who just won't go away. He's a very good rugby player. For me, he's not the best scrum half. I think he's better at fullback, frankly. Part of that has to do with the time he spent on the 7th circuit, but also at James Bay, his home club, he's often been seen at fullback rather than scrum half, which really hinders his core abilities. His passing and his tactical decision-making isn't always the greatest. But again, he's another player who can make something out of nothing. He can do things that other players can't. I'd like to see him focus on scrum half from here until the World Cup, because I think he'll be in the squad. I think we need him in the squad. But as of right now, I see him as third choice, possibly moving into that bench spot if Phil isn't quite fit in time. Jamie McKenzie, a member of the World Cup squad last time, he's kind of faded a bit with university commitments since then. He got the call up again for the ARC last year, even though I don't think he was the best scrum half at the Ontario Blues. He's still a solid player with a good pass, but as of right now, I think he's very much on the outside looking in. And speaking of those Ontario Blues, this guy was hugely impressive for them last season. I think university commitments restricted his ability to take part in the ARC. He's got all the skills you look for from a scrum half. He passes well, he kicks for goal, he's got good composure, he runs well. For me, he's the next best option to Gordon McCrory. I'm not sure he makes the World Cup, but it's certainly within his capabilities. Moving over to fly half, Canada's biggest problem position, undoubtedly. Connor Braid really had a career renaissance last year. After playing so well against the Maori a couple years ago, got picked up by Doncaster and then just kind of dropped off a little bit. He revived his form with the 7 squad last year, got a contract with Glasgow Warriors. Now, he didn't quite make it at first, and they sent him to London Scottish, where he's been starting at number 12, but he's just been called back up to the Pro 12, so hopefully he gets some time with them. He's a tricky one. He played fly half for us in the fall. I think that's where we have to see him going forward just because of our limited options there, but his best position is probably number 12, so could be 10, could be 12. I think he's a certainty for the World Cup. He's got all the attributes to succeed at either, so if a couple other guys don't quite come through, he could well be our number 10 option for the World Cup. Harry Jones, he's a very similar player. He's with the 7 side right now. He was kind of the incumbent number 10 before injury and Braid filled in for him. He's another, he plays 10, he plays 12. For me, his best position is number 12. He runs really well, maybe a little bit too much for a fly half, and his kicking game isn't quite as strong. I don't see him as a starter for the World Cup, but I do see him as possibly a 10-12 option off the bench. It's great to finally see Liam Underwood back playing again. He had a lot of concussion problems, and it was a big worry. He missed pretty well all of last year, but he's still our best domestic hope to play in that number 10 jersey. He's got all the skills. Runs well, passes well, kicks well, defends really well. He's the kind of player who has time on the ball. Hopefully he stays fit, he goes to Fiji and does well, and there's every chance if he does that he could be our starting fly half in September. That said, it's a lot of ifs, and if you were picking the side today, he probably wouldn't be in it. but I think all things considered, he will be there in the fall. Shane O'Leary, another you might not be aware of, is an Irish-born player. He played fly half for under-20 side a couple seasons ago. He's an excellent kicker. He spent some time with Grenoble in France last year, but now he's with Connacht in Ireland. He hasn't managed to crack the first side, but all the reports coming from the reserve games have said he's been one of the standout players. Now, he hasn't yet featured at all in any of Crowley's squads, so we're not really quite sure if he fits anywhere in his plans. I don't really see how we can afford to ignore a professional standard fly half, especially a goal-kicking one. So hopefully he at least gets a look this year. He might not make the World Cup squad, but I think we'd be foolish to ignore him completely. Who knows, he could be the next Ander Monroe. Nathan Hirayama, similar to Phil Mack, an absolutely world-class sevens player. He was part of the World Cup squad in 2011, but he's never really had the same impact at 15s as he has at sevens. Just had major surgery on his shoulder. For me, at this point, I'd like to see him concentrate on sevens, especially gearing up towards the Olympics. I don't think, all things considered, he will be in the picture come September. Patrick Parfy, of course, from one of Canada's great rugby families. He's a very solid player. He plays 10 or 12, handles well, passes well, sees the game nicely, has a neat little short kicking game. I think his best position again is 12. I think he's probably a non-traveling reserve for the World Cup. I think with so many other options at that position, he's just not quite in the frame. So if you're picking the side today, McCrory, Mack, White at scrum half, Braid, and Jones at fly half. Again, Underwood, you wouldn't want to bet against him making the side. O'Leary is an outside shot. Ferguson at scrum half could have a go there. So there's certainly some competition, but as it stands, these are probably the favorites. Moving out into the three-quarter line, specifically the midfield, Kieran Hearn. It's great to see him finally in the midfield. I think that's his best position. He spent so much time early on in the outside backs, but for me, all his skills, his size, everything, he should have been in the midfield from day one. He's got a great offload, good hands, big boot on him. The thing with Hearn that's a little bit frustrating is sometimes he'll make a break and then he'll throw the ball away, or he'll just have a little lapse in concentration on defense. He's kind of a frustrating player, and then he's got so much talent. I think he's a certainty for the World Cup. Whether he's a starter or not kind of depends on whether he can find consistency in his game, but I think 12 is his best shot. Speaking of frustrating players, Connor Traynor. At one point, the golden boy of Canadian rugby scored 2 tries against the All Blacks in 2011, but he's really kind of flattered to deceive since. He's shown amazing skills at times with our 7 side and even sometimes with the 15s, but it's finding that consistency of excellence. One thing that really drives me nuts that he's doing these days, he's doing this little kind of Sonny Bill Williams backhanded flip pass when it's really not on. He should have 2 hands on the ball and make a simple pass. So I think he makes it difficult for himself at times. He's still got potential, but it's kind of now or never as far as he's concerned. I think if you pick the side today, he's in it. But I also think there are other players there who are putting pressure on him, and I would not be surprised if he's told to concentrate on 7s rather than 15s. DTH van der Merwe, surely Canada's best attacking player. He plays for Glasgow Warriors. He was a star at the last World Cup playing outside center. Now he plays most of his rugby on the wing these days for Glasgow, but I still think for Canada he's our best option at 13, and that's where I see him starting in the World Cup. Nick Blevins, he's kind of a meat and potatoes center, hard running, hard hitting, straight up and down, hard line runner. Now here's a guy who's really excelled on the domestic level. He did really well in the CRC, but he's maybe struggled taking that next step up. Sometimes he's shown us good things, sometimes he's a little bit off. It's pretty clear that Crowley was frustrated with him at the ARC and threw him out to languish on the wing. He's not a wing by any stretch of the imagination. At this point, I think he's an outsider for the World Cup, probably a non-traveling reserve. He doesn't quite have the distribution. I think we have better options in the midfield. One of those being Phil McKenzie. Now, he was a wing at the last World Cup, and he's playing wing in most of his professional rugby. He was with London Irish before. He's now with Sale Sharks. Now, he's really not seeing much game time with Sale, unfortunately. I think he'll move clubs next season, but he's still a talented full-time professional. I think he'll be in the World Cup squad, even though he hasn't featured a lot recently for Canada. I think with a good solid training camp, he's still probably one of our best three-quarters. Whether he's playing in the wing, whether he's playing at inside center, I would expect to see him in the squad in September. Mike Scholl's kind of a forgotten man of Canadian rugby. He was in the World Cup squad in 2011. He's been injured a whole lot in the last few years. He's spent some time with the Sevens program. He doesn't really look like a natural Sevens player to me. Good hard-running center, can break the line, make offloads. The question is, can he stay fit? I think he's an outsider at this point just because he's been out so much, but he has the potential to make the squad. He just offers something a little bit different to the other contenders. Pat Kay, hugely promising player out of BC, played fly half for the BC Bears in the CRC last year. Kind of had a rough time, got called up for the ARC and really struggled playing out of position at fullback. For me, he's a 10 or a 12. He runs really well, passes well, he's an excellent kicker. He's with the 7 side now, and it's great to see him getting some confidence back. I think the World Cup is probably coming a little too soon for him, but certainly a potential starter for Canada in the future. Mike Fuailefau, big physical center. His father was a Samoan international. He had a very strong CRC, but then was sent with the Sevens program instead of playing in the ARC. He's got surprising footwork for a big man, and he's another who offers something just a little bit different in the midfield. Mostly a 13, plays a little bit of 12, I think. I think he's another who's just kind of on the cusp. Probably not going to quite make the side this year, but in the next year or two, I think he'll crack in and be a regular in our midfield. So here we are as it stands. Hearn, trainer, Mackenzie van der Merwe. Of course, Mackenzie and van der Merwe could just as easily be seen on the wing. And there's all kinds of different permutations that Crowley can play with. Of these, I think the most likely are Hearn and van der Merwe. And there's every chance for others to squeak their way in here, especially if Underwood makes it, maybe Braid or Jones slides over to the midfield. Rounding things out, let's get to the outside backs. Surely the guy who's improved the most since going overseas, Jeff Hasler. He's been an absolute star with Ospreys. He's our starting right winger. Made the Pro 12 Dream Team last year. He's really come a long way. He's still very raw, lots to learn about the game. Now, unfortunately, he suffered a knee injury at the dying moments of that game against Romania in November, but he should be back in a couple months. He'll be fine for the World Cup. We desperately need him out there. He's just an excellent attacker, gives us a bit of X factor out there on the wing. On the other wing, I think Taylor Paris is the front runner. Of course, at one time, he was the next big thing. He's still very young. He's been starting with Agen for the last couple years, keeping some good players out of the side there. He kind of stumbled a bit with Canada, got dropped by Crowley, then recalled. For me, he's got to be our starter on the left wing. He and Hasler gives us 2 dynamic finishers. Paris has a little bit more feel to the game, can come in off his wing. That said, there is competition. Jordan Wilson-Ross has finally gotten his shot with the national side, even though he's played most of his rugby with the Ontario Blues in recent time at outside center, which I think is his best position. He can play 13, he can play wing, he could even play a little bit of fullback. He played there with the under-20s. Really powerful runner, low center of gravity. Every time he touches the ball, he goes forwards. For me, he's outplayed Trainer domestically for the past couple years. I think he's been really hard done by the national selectors up until now. There's something there they're seeing. Maybe it's a little ill-discipline or something, but every time I've seen him play, he never gives anything less than 100%. I think his versatility makes him a very useful option for the World Cup, but right now you would say he's a long shot, probably a non-traveling reserve, but he's a very good player, underrated in my opinion. Hopefully he gets a good crack at it this year. If anybody new can break into the side this year, it's got to be Justin Douglas. This guy is in sensational form in the 7th circuit right now, and while normally that doesn't necessarily translate into 15s, as a winger, I think it's probably the easiest to transfer between the two. He's got good size, he's got good speed, he's got tremendous finishing ability. Now, we haven't seen much of his kicking or kick coverage, understandably, so he's probably really a year or two away from making the senior side. But in terms of raw athletic ability, he certainly has the goods. Sean Duke, Canada's record 7 scorer. He's just about world class in the short version of the game, but he's never quite looked completely comfortable at the 15s at the national level. He's still a great finisher, but he can sometimes be found out of position, and his passing game isn't quite up to that level. I think he should stick it out with 7s, focus on the Olympics. I don't think we'll see him at the World Cup. Matt Evans is an underrated player. In my opinion, he's crucial to our World Cup chances. Missed last year with injury. The year before, he was Canada's outstanding back. He started all across the back line for Canada, from fly half right through fullback. His best position for me is fullback. Great counter-attacker, good boot, just a smart, intelligent player. He's vocal. I think he's got to be our starting 15. He's vice-captain with Cornish Pirates. Just came back from a serious injury. I think he's got a big year ahead as long as he can stay fit. And that's not to take anything away, of course, from James Pritchard, one of Canada's greatest servants for the past, 10, 12 years. Canada's record scorer now. World-class kicker. He starts at fullback for Bedford Blues. I just think his age is starting to show a little. He's still very valuable. I think he'll probably go as a squad member to the World Cup. For me, Evans has got to start at fullback over him. But what an inspiration for younger players. His work rate, his professionalism. It's just impossible to say a bad word about the guy. So as it stands, Paris, Hasler, Evans, Pritchard. I think those are the outside backs. It's only 4, but that's because we've got so much versatility. I think this is pretty much dead set. I think all 4 of these guys, if fit, will go. So there we are. We made it. Looking back again at 2011, the 30 players who went. We had a relatively young and inexperienced side at the time, but about half of them, maybe a little more, will probably make it this time around. The makeup will probably look something like 5 props, 3 hookers, 4 second row, 6 back row, 3 scrum halves, 2 fly halves, 4 centers, 2 wingers, 2 fullbacks. Again, this is entirely speculative. Let me know what you think. Am I wrong? Am I right? Did I leave anybody out? Did I put anybody in I shouldn't have? Check out the website, raiserugby.com. Hit me up at Twitter, at raiserugby. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep your head up, keep your hands out, and whatever you do, don't miss your tackles.